Episode 5, Buried Where No One Looked. The disappearance of Emily Carter was never treated as a crime. From the beginning, it was framed as a delay, an inconvenience, a situation that would likely resolve itself once enough time had passed. Emily was 27 years old and worked evening shifts at a small medical clinic on the edge of town. Her routine was consistent, predictable, and familiar to the people closest to her. On the night she disappeared, she left work shortly after 6 o'clock. Security cameras recorded her walking through the parking lot, unlocking her car, and placing her bag on the passenger seat. Her movements showed no urgency. No hesitation. Nothing that suggested fear. She never arrived home. When her sister reported her missing the following morning, responding officers followed standard procedure. Emily was an adult. She had no history of impulsive behavior, substance abuse, or mental illness. There was no immediate evidence of a crime. The report was filed, logged, and quietly deprioritized. 2 days later, Emily's car was located on a residential street several miles from her apartment. It was parked legally, locked, and undamaged. Her phone and personal belongings were still inside. To investigators, the scene suggested voluntary absence rather than criminal activity. The case was closed pending further information. 8 months later, Rachel Moore disappeared. Rachel was 31 years old, a freelance graphic designer who lived on the opposite side of town. Unlike Emily, Rachel vanished in broad daylight. Security footage captured her entering a grocery store, walking through the aisles, paying at the register, and leaving through the front doors. She was never seen again. Her car was discovered 3 days later in a commuter parking lot. Locked. Undisturbed. Silent. Once again, there were no signs of violence. Once again, the investigation slowed, then stopped. Over the next 4 years, 4 additional women vanished under similar circumstances. Different ages. Different professions. Different neighborhoods. Each disappearance was treated as an isolated event. Each case was assigned to a different detective. No shared database connected them. No one compared timelines closely enough to recognize the pattern forming beneath the surface. The town of Briarwood continued to believe itself safe. Briarwood was known for quiet streets, trimmed lawns, and familiar faces. It was the kind of place where danger was expected to come from elsewhere. That assumption shaped every early decision in the investigation. The break in the case did not come from careful analysis or long-term strategy. It came by accident. A drainage issue developed behind a modest house on Maple Street. The homeowner, Thomas Reed, contacted a local contractor and approved repairs without hesitation. He was polite, cooperative, and unremarkable. He left for work that morning as the crew began digging. Less than an hour later, a worker struck something solid beneath the soil. At first, it was assumed to be construction debris. When the wrapping was exposed, police were called immediately. What investigators uncovered beneath the surface changed the direction of 6 unresolved cases. The remains were human. Carefully wrapped and deliberately concealed. The soil surrounding them showed signs of repeated disturbance, layered in a way that suggested planning rather than panic. A forensic excavation was ordered. Over the following days, investigators uncovered multiple burial sites within the same property. Each location had been disguised beneath landscaping designed to appear permanent and undisturbed. These were not impulsive acts. They were calculated. DNA analysis confirmed identities already familiar to law enforcement. Emily Carter. Rachel Moore. 4 other women whose disappearances had long been classified as unrelated. The cases were no longer separate. They were part of a single narrative that had gone unnoticed for years. Thomas Reed was arrested that evening. Neighbors gathered as police vehicles lined Maple Street. Some expressed disbelief. Others defended him openly. Many said nothing at all. Reed had lived in the neighborhood for nearly a decade. He was known as quiet, reliable, and reserved. He had no criminal record and no history of violence. During interrogation, Reed denied involvement. He spoke clearly, carefully, and without visible emotion. He suggested someone else had used his property without his knowledge. Investigators did not argue. They listened. The evidence told a different story. Reed's employment history revealed a pattern of temporary work that allowed mobility and access. Delivery services. Maintenance contracts. Short-term construction jobs. Positions that required trust and left little trace. A search of his home uncovered handwritten notebooks. They were not confessions. They were records. Dates. Distances. Weather conditions. Observations about routines and locations. Psychological evaluations later described Reed as methodical and detached. He did not view himself as violent. He viewed himself as controlled. Forensic analysis connected Reed to multiple locations linked to the victims. Fibers, soil composition, and tool marks formed a chain of circumstantial evidence. Each element alone was weak. Together, they were overwhelming. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Prosecutors focused on timelines, opportunity, and behavioral patterns. They avoided sensational language. The defense emphasized the absence of direct witnesses and the lack of a murder weapon. They argued coincidence and contamination. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was unanimous. Thomas Reed was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the months that followed, law enforcement agencies reevaluated how disappearances were handled. Cold cases were reopened. Databases were merged. Early assumptions were challenged. The house on Maple Street was eventually demolished. The land was sold and redeveloped. Grass covered the ground where evidence had once been hidden. Years later, children played on that street. Neighbors walked their dogs past the property. Life continued, unaware of what had once been concealed beneath the surface. The case became a lesson not in brutality, but in blindness. Not in chaos, but in routine. Because danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it blends into the background, protected by familiarity, trust, and the belief that ordinary places are safe. And when it is finally uncovered, the most disturbing realization is not how long it was hidden, but how close it always was. After the sentencing, the investigation did not simply end. Internal reviews were ordered across multiple departments. Detectives were asked to explain why the disappearances had been treated as isolated events. Why no one had compared timelines earlier. Why routine had overridden instinct. Several officers admitted what had gone unspoken for years. There had been no pressure to connect the cases. No immediate signs of violence. No public demand for answers. Each disappearance had felt quiet. Too quiet to raise alarms. In the months that followed, new protocols were introduced. Missing persons cases were flagged sooner. Patterns were reviewed automatically. Jurisdictions shared information that had once remained separated by procedure. For the families, these changes arrived too late. Some attended the hearings that followed the trial. Others chose distance, unwilling to reopen what time had barely managed to seal. There was no moment of relief. Only the confirmation that what they had feared had been true. The neighborhood around Maple Street changed as well. People avoided the sidewalk near the former property. Conversation stopped when the house was mentioned. Trust did not disappear overnight, but it thinned. Years later, investigators still referenced the case during training. Not because of the crimes themselves, but because of how easily they had been overlooked. No dramatic mistakes. No single failure. Just small assumptions repeated until they became policy. The case did not redefine how investigators searched for criminals. It redefined how they questioned silence. Because silence, they learned, was not absence. It was presence waiting to be noticed.